In a modest living room in Surrey, England, a 7-year-old girl named Emmy sits cross-legged on the carpet, carefully arranging plastic teacups on a low table. The scene might seem ordinary enough, a child playing pretend as children do, except for one remarkable detail. At her feet, sliding slowly across the carpet, is Sher, a 16-foot reticulated python. The snake's massive coils brush against Emmy's legs and toys as she moves. When Sher rests her broad head on the table's edge, joining the tea party in her own quiet way, the plastic cups wobble under the weight. Emmy giggles. To her, this is simply how things are. This is her friend. Ed Taoka, Emmy's father, watches from just a few steps away. His body is tense, ready to intervene at the slightest change in Sher's behavior, but his face remains calm. He has done this 1,000 times before. He knows his snake. More importantly, he knows his daughter. A film crew from an animal-focused outlet captures the moment. Close-up shots of a child's small hand resting casually on thick patterned scales, the snake's tongue flicking near plastic cakes. It is an image that would divide opinions around the world. At that very moment, Ed's phone buzzes. Old clips of Emmy and Sher have begun circulating online again, reigniting debates about whether what this father allows is magical or dangerous beyond measure. 5 years earlier, Emmy was barely 2 years old, still unsteady on her feet, when her father came home carrying a small container. Inside was a tiny reticulated python, so slim that Ed jokingly called her bootlace size. This was Sher, newly arrived, with her whole life ahead of her. Ed was already an experienced reptile keeper. He worked as a massage therapist by trade, but his true passion lay in understanding animals that most people feared. For years, he had dreamed of raising a large constrictor with the same care and patience he brought to his human clients. He sat on the living room floor that day, carefully opening the container while Emmy watched with round, curious eyes. First, he let Sher slide gently over his own hands, demonstrating calm, measured movements. Then he guided Emmy's little fingers toward the snake. "Soft touches," he told her. "No grabbing, no poking. We respect her, or we don't touch her at all." Sher's tiny head turned toward the toddler, tongue flicking, and Emmy squealed, not in fear, but in pure delight. She reached out with tentative, careful strokes. It was the first time she had ever touched an animal that most adults would never dare to hold. Ed watched this small miracle unfold and made a silent promise. He would teach his daughter that how they treated Sher now would determine how safe and gentle she would be when she grew large. This relationship would be built on respect, or not at all. The years passed in a montage of growth, 2 lives unfolding side by side. On the doorframe, pencil marks tracked Emmy's height as she grew from toddler to young girl. In the corner of the room, Sher's enclosure expanded again and again to keep pace with her remarkable growth. At first, Emmy could easily pick up Sher, cradling the young snake in her arms like a shy, scaly scarf. As time went on, Sher's weight increased. Soon, Emmy could only lift a portion of her body before having to set her down. Eventually, the transformation was complete. By the time the story captured the world's attention, Sher had grown to 16 feet, long enough to loop across the entire room. Ed made a point of teaching Emmy that reticulated pythons are the longest snake species in the world. For the little girl, this became a badge of pride. Her friend was special. Another snake joined the household, Sunny, a second reticulated python, named to complete the musical duo, Sunny and Sher. Sunny was even more laid back than Sher, content to rest in his enclosure or drape himself quietly over Ed's arms. Emmy joked that Sunny was the lazy one, though in truth, both snakes shared a gentle, unhurried nature. Ed described Sher as a gentle diva. She loved her routine, disliked surprises, and demanded that everything, from handling to feeding, be done just right. At feeding time, Emmy watched as her father offered Sher food, learning that the great snake refused rabbits entirely and would only accept defrosted rats. Even a predator this large, it seemed, could be surprisingly particular. Over the years, Emmy learned to recognize the difference between Sher's alert feeding posture and her relaxed tea party mood. This knowledge added layers of understanding to their bond, a vocabulary without words. When the film crew asked Ed to explain how such an unlikely friendship could exist, he was careful to emphasize one thing. This bond did not happen by accident. It came from daily discipline and unwavering routine. Sher and Sunny were handled multiple times every day, without exception, so that human touch became normal to them, never a trigger for fear or aggression. Ed would gently lift portions of Sher's body, shift her coils, and calmly guide her movements while Emmy followed his lead. The golden rule was simple. Emmy was never left unsupervised with the snakes. Every interaction happened with Ed close enough to intervene immediately. "No grabbing, no poking," he would remind her. "We respect her space first." This reflected years of patient practice. It was never just about making the snake sociable. It was equally about training Emmy to be gentle, patient, and respectful. Two beings learning to trust each other. Ed also took time to address what he called the sizing up myth, the common belief that pythons lie alongside humans to measure whether they can eat them. He dismissed it as nonsense. Snakes are ambush predators, not planners. They do not stretch out to calculate potential meals. His tone was calm but firm. He was not just defending his own animals, he was trying to speak up for an entire group of creatures misunderstood by most of the world. Emmy listened, absorbing the idea that Sher was not a monster or a villain. She was simply a creature with instincts, deserving of knowledge and respect, not fear. In 2017, Ed uploaded a simple home video. Emmy watching television with Sher, wrapped loosely around her waist like a living blanket. At first, it was just a family clip meant for friends and a small community of reptile enthusiasts. Then the views began to climb, hundreds, then thousands, then more, as strangers shared the footage in shock, fascination, or outrage. Headlines and comments exploded across the internet. Some called Emmy the bravest little girl in the world. Others accused Ed of child endangerment and reckless parenting. People fixated on the image. A small child, a giant constrictor, a relaxed domestic scene that triggered deep instinctive fear in many viewers. The backlash intensified until the atmosphere turned genuinely ugly. Facebook restricted the original video, treating it as potentially harmful content. Ed read accusations online, claims that Sher was just waiting to strike or sizing the child up for dinner. These were the same myths he had spent years debunking. Meanwhile, at home, Emmy continued watching her cartoons with Sher draped loosely around her, entirely unaware of the storm her friendship had unleashed on the other side of a screen. The contrast was stark. Inside the living room, peaceful familiarity. Outside, a tidal wave of fear, anger, and misunderstanding. As criticism mounted, Ed decided he had to speak up, not just for himself, but for Emmy and the snakes. In interviews and comments, he emphasized that Sher and Sunny had never bitten anyone in the family. The irony, he pointed out, was that their domestic cats had scratched and bitten them multiple times, leaving far more actual injuries than the pythons ever had. Ed began to articulate one of his most controversial claims, that supervised interaction with these snakes was, in his view, safer than trampolines and bouncy castles. He pointed to how many children were injured each year on those supposedly harmless playthings, compared to the extremely low number of incidents involving well-kept, responsibly handled snakes. It was a calculated comparison, the familiar risk of a child tumbling from a bouncy castle versus the calm, watchful presence of a snake whose behavior Ed read every single day. He used his experience as a reptile keeper to explain how constant handling, routine feeding, and strict supervision reduced risk to something he considered acceptable, lower in his view than many common childhood activities. Yet the more he defended Sher, the more some people called him reckless, accusing him of playing Russian roulette with his daughter's life. Through it all, Emmy continued to treat Sher as her best friend, unable to understand why so many strangers thought her companion was a threat. We return to the present day. The tea party is being filmed for a new video. Emmy lifts a plastic teacup and offers it to Sher, while Ed's hands hover just out of frame, ready to guide the snake if she moves too quickly or towards something fragile. Ed explains on camera how Emmy and Sher grew up together, how Emmy used to hold Sher completely, and now the snake is too heavy for her to lift. This detail carries the weight of time passing and a bond deepening. The child and the snake are both too large for things to go back to how they were. He speaks again about the way he raised both of them, the snake, gently conditioned to accept touch, and the child, carefully taught never to tug, jab, or treat Sher like a toy. Emmy demonstrates that training as she carefully shifts her weight, making sure not to pinch a coil under her leg or startle the snake with sudden movements. It is second nature to her now. Ed addresses the camera with visible frustration. "No one ever gets to see the good nature of these animals," he says. "Whenever a large constrictor appears in the media, it's nearly always framed as dangerous or evil." He hopes that showing Emmy and Sher's calm, respectful interactions will offer a different narrative and soften the harsh judgments of strangers. The crew records one last shot. Emmy leaning back against Sher's thick body, the python's head resting on the table, the tea party frozen in an image that will, once again, divide the internet. After the filming ends, the living room returns to normal. Cameras are packed away, teacups lie scattered across the carpet, and Sher is guided gently back to her secure enclosure. Ed and Emmy stand together, watching the snake coil herself into a resting position. Online, Sher's reputation may be terrifying, but here, in this room, she is simply a gentle diva, ready for a nap. Ed reflects aloud. One day, Emmy will be older, a teenager perhaps, or a young woman, looking back at the time when her best friend was the longest species of snake in the world. He hopes she will remember not only the tea parties, the television sessions, and the childhood play, but also the lessons, respect for animals, understanding over fear, and the importance of responsible care. He repeats more quietly now that his snakes have never harmed them, while the family cats have left scratches and bites as souvenirs of everyday life. Emmy asks a simple question. Will people ever stop being scared of Sher? Ed answers honestly. Fear is hard to change, he tells her, but stories like theirs can help. The chapter closes with one more small tea party, just for them. No cameras, no internet. Just Emmy setting out 2 plastic cups and patting Sher's coils as her father watches from nearby. For Emmy, Sher is not a viral controversy or a headline. She is simply the friend who has been there since she was 2 years old, living proof that even the most feared creatures can reveal a gentle side when met with knowledge, respect, and love.